So this is the short review on Aquinas and his text that was written in the Middle Ages called Summa Theologica. And I'm sure you remember that Aquinas was one of the founding fathers of the Catholic Church, and he was both a philosopher and a theologian. So he worked both in philosophy and in religion. And I'm saying that first because that's essentially how I'm going to break the whole text down into religion on this side and philosophy on that side. Religion has to do with belief, faith, revelation, and acceptance. Philosophy, on the other hand, has to do with proof and reasoning. So these are the two separate ways, the two separate disciplines Aquinas looks at to talk about ways to know God. Okay? So revelation versus proof. Religion versus philosophy. He wants to know, as you remember, basically his main question is, does God exist, and how do we prove that? Or how do we know that? How do we know that? Well, there's two ways he says you can know. You can know the way of the believer. It can be revelation. You can just accept it. And that works for a lot of people, right? Or there's proof, there's argumentation, and that works for other people. So he's just trying to cover all of his bases, right? Think of revelation as a direct route to the truth. You don't have to think about it. You don't have to question it. There's like a big highway sign that says, right here, here's the truth. We're giving you a little shortcut, okay? So that's how revelation treats knowledge of God. You just accept it because it was given in a sacred text. And Aquinas thinks that's totally good and, in fact, necessary, because there's a lot of things that we can't know other than through revelation. And most of you brought this out in your papers. He puts a high value on it because there's many things that you simply cannot know. How the universe was created, what's the afterlife, and mankind has to go on faith alone. However, Aquinas is also a philosopher, and he thinks that it's also possible to prove God or to demonstrate God's existence. And that's by logical, rational demonstration. So, and here you can ask questions, you can doubt, you can try to like poke holes in the argument. With revelation, there's no poking holes in it. That would defeat the whole purpose of accepting it and taking that direct path. But with philosophy and logic and reasoning, you're allowed to ask questions and you're allowed to say, hey, that proof makes no sense to me. So he's appealing to the skeptic on this side, or the scientist, right? So the 5 proofs for the reasoning philosophical person that Aquinas gives have to do with God's effects in the world, okay? With God's effects. What does that mean? What are we talking about? What are God's effects? Well, you can't see God, as most of you pointed out in your papers. If God does exist, it certainly would not be anything that you could prove or pinpoint or run an experiment. There's no direct perception. And so, of course, that leaves us very much open to skepticism. So Aquinas is going to try to show you evidence of God's existence in the influence, the effects, the impact God has had on the world, okay? And that's his 5 proofs. They're called the cosmological proofs. Cosmological just comes from cosmos, that means world, and it means trying to find evidence of God in the world. Now, you don't need to know all 5 proofs. It's important that you understand them, or at least understand the basic form of them. And the basic form is sort of like there's a chain of cause and effects that you trace back all the way back to the first cause, or the first original source, and that's always the divine being, God, for Aquinas. Look, the leaves are blowing in the wind. So what moves the leaves? What moves the leaves is the wind, but what's moving the wind? What's moving the wind is the fact that the earth is heated differently at different parts of the atmosphere. Well, why is that true? Why is there why does the air move around, and why is it heated differently? Well, that's because the earth spins and it's heated differently by the sun. Well, then let's ask about that. Why does it rotate? What causes that movement? Well, that movement was caused by the original creation of the universe, and it sort of transpired at the very beginning that that's how the matter formed, and rotational energy was given to it. Well, why does that happen? What was the very first cause? Now you're getting into the territory where you need either very high level physics and or a first cause, a first mover. And that's where Aquinas says God comes in. God is always the first in any one of these chains. So the other four proofs are, you can read about them, they're in my little summary. How does something come into existence? Well, if it's, how did that house get there? There was a builder. How did the builder come to be? Well, through his parents. How did his parents come to be? Etc., etc. And so you go all the way back to God. The same argument for possible and necessary existence, which simply means look around you. Did anything really have to exist? Is anything necessarily there? No, you can imagine that nothing existed at all. Not you, not your parents, not the United States or China or any other country. None of it had to exist. Oh, but it does. So Aquinas thinks that because the universe does exist, there must have been at least one necessary being, and that's God. Then there's an argument for perfection, which is that there's different degrees of perfection. It must have all come from God. And the fifth one is nice. It has to do with purpose and how everything in nature kind of fits together. So, for example, when it rains, it makes the crops grow. Or when you cut yourself, you tend to heal. So why is it that the world works in this kind of orderly, self-sustaining way? What is it that gives it that ability? And Aquinas says, well, it's obviously put into order by a first being. This has, again, if that's the basics there. If you want to know more, keep listening. But that fifth question, I'm going to go into a little bit more, and So to sum up, Aquinas was both a philosopher and a theologian, which meant he tried to harmonize, to reconcile faith on one hand and reason on the other. So revelation, like a direct hotline to God, a direct hotline to the truth, and reasoning or proof, which is logically deducing God's existence through looking at the world and inferring from certain effects that God must exist. Okay, just a final little appendix on the difference between Aquinas and Aristotle, because they're easy to confuse. They're easy to confuse because Aquinas actually copies Aristotle a lot. Aristotle's the ancient Greek philosopher long before Christianity, and Aquinas is one of the first Christian thinkers. So both Aristotle and Aquinas mention happiness as a natural human desire, that which we want more than anything else, but slightly different answers to it, right? So Aristotle, because he's doesn't really believe in an afterlife or an eternal soul or a creative God that we can have a relationship with, he just believes that humans have a natural function, a natural purpose, which is to fulfill all of their abilities. So for Aristotle, happiness lies in cultivating your best self by cultivating your intellectual and moral virtues, as you saw in the Aristotle review. But Aquinas, because he's introduced God at every level, will say that happiness is something that we have a natural desire for, but we're not exactly sure what we want. So we know we want to be happy, but we don't know what will make us happy. And he compares it to when you hear someone coming, you know that someone's coming, but you don't know if it's Peter or Paul. And that little inclination for happiness is the clue, says Aquinas, that you should be looking for a relationship to the divine. Now, just bear in mind that that's a very different answer from Aristotle, who also says we have a natural desire for happiness, but that happiness is won through developing your best self and your virtues. Okay, I hope that helps. Thank you.